Do you have concerns about artificial intelligence? Well, I'd like to try and provide you a counter to your concerns. Technologies can have two faces to them. Just like how a gun or a knife can be used to both protect and harm, technologies that were initially developed for benign purposes have found malicious uses among perpetrators. Now, this aspect of technology is known as the dual-use dilemma. For example, encryption. Encryption was a technology that was initially developed to facilitate private communication between two parties and to also protect confidential information. But now, encryption is also used by certain bad actors to hide illegal content such as child sexual abuse materials or CSAM, and to evade detection by authorities. Now there's also the other side of the spectrum. How many of you used GPS to come here today? Well, me too. GPS, a technology that I personally cannot live without, was actually initially developed for military navigation and targeting. But now, GPS is used by everyone to find their favorite restaurants, among other things. Similarly, radar. Radar was another technology that was initially developed during the Second World War for detecting enemy ships and crafts. And now, radar is used for weather forecasting, and thus for saving lives in areas that are especially prone to hurricanes in our nation. Sun Tzu, the Chinese military strategist, said, "In the midst of chaos, there's also opportunity." Now, similar to these technologies that have the dual-use dilemma, another new, disruptive technology known as generative artificial intelligence, or generative AI, is taking our nation and the world by storm. Generative AI such as ChatGPT are different from traditional AI such as face recognition. While both of these AIs are first trained on a large amounts of training data sets in a supervised manner, generative AIs go a couple of steps further. Generative AIs are then trained on multiple contextual and reasoning-based subtasks like question answering, and finally they're trained by humans in a process known as reinforcement learning based on human feedback, wherein humans rate the responses of a generative AI as good or bad. And this is what makes generative AI so good, so helpful to the prompts that we give it to get answers and outputs from a generative AI. Now, generative AIs are capable of creating new ideas, new products, new services that are making our lives easier, more productive, and more creative. But they're also bringing in widespread fears of automating away our jobs, of developing a conscience and attacking their creators, of making things that just lack creativity and suppressing human ingenuity. But what if generative AIs can be used to make the internet a safer space for all? Mark Natnagara, who's also a TEDx speaker and an educationist and a proponent of AI in education, said, while referring to traditional AIs, that AIs can't experience, generalize, reason, reflect, think abstractly, or understand relevance. But what if generative AIs can do some of these things? I study how to use AI to prevent cyber harm, and I would like to propose this idea that generative AIs can be used to detect cyber harm, issues like cyberbullying, online hate and harassment, fake news, and the proliferation of unsafe images. Critical issues that our society is facing today. I began my research career in 2018 trying to detect cyberbullying in text and images using traditional AI. And while we were successful in achieving a good level of detection accuracy, these traditional AI models were still quite limited. Have you ever heard some people use this phrase, "I know it when I see it"? Yes, when asked to rationalize their decision about identifying something, some people say, "I know it when I see it," indicating that they cannot rationalize about their decision. And this is how these traditional AI models kind of worked. They were detecting cyberbullying in a very different way than what we humans perceive as cyberbullying. These traditional AI models were only detecting certain cyberbullying patterns that existed in their training data sets. Thus, I know it when I see it. Now, the issues of cyber harm, right? Issues like cyberbullying, online hate and harassment, and fake news, these issues are very hard to detect automatically. And why is that? That is because these are deeply contextual issues. These are social issues that even we humans struggle to fully comprehend. Social media platforms use a combination of human moderators as well as automated tools to detect and flag down posts that contain cyber harm. But the problem is that moderators are only human. We cannot have eyes everywhere and all the time, and automated tools are just based on traditional AIs. They lack the capability to fully capture the context that is needed to detect cyber harm accurately. A particularly alarming incident that happened with me was when I was speaking to a law enforcement agent who was describing her job. And one of her roles was it to go through and review pictures that are taken from a crime scene investigation. And typically, these pictures are very disturbing. They could contain child sexual abuse materials, or they could contain violence. And her role was it to go through these pictures to maybe identify the victim in the picture or identify certain clues or evidence from the background in these pictures. And you can only imagine the kind of trauma, the kind of PTSD someone like this would have when looking at such pictures over and over again. Now, generative AIs are becoming more and more pervasive in our daily lives. With just a simple prompt, the homework or the report that used to take hours to do can now be done in just a few seconds. But what generative AIs can also do is human-like reasoning. Yes, when prompted in a certain way, generative AIs, especially large language models, can be made to reason the way we humans reason. Now, many research teams all across the world are leveraging generative AIs to detect cyber harm. Large language models like ChatGPT are being used to detect online hate, even the kinds of online hate that we had never previously witnessed before, like the anti-Asian hate that erupted during the COVID-19 pandemic. Large vision language models, which are large language models that are equipped with vision technologies, are being used to detect and flag down pictures that are taken from harmful children's games and that were being used to proliferate these games to children on social media platforms. These large vision language models are also being used to make unsafe pictures safer by first identifying and pinpointing those regions in the image that are unsafe, and then targetedly blurring out only these unsafe regions so that the rest of the image is available for reviewing, thus making this whole process a little bit more safer to a law enforcement agent. I recently came across another fascinating study that had two large language models argue against one another about whether a meme is harmful or not, and a judge LLM taking a final decision based on the arguments presented by these two argumentative generative AIs. I would like to leave you with an idea, and the idea is this: generative AI for good. I would like to urge everyone here in this room to try out a decision framework that uses a generative AI to detect cyber harm. And this is how this framework goes. First, define a problem of cyber harm in a way that it can be operationalized. For example, online hate can be defined as a piece of text that contains derogatory or disparaging words and a target group or an individual, and these derogatory or disparaging words aimed at this target group or individual. And while coming up with this definition, just think of a way how you as a human would reason about this definition. Next, divide this problem of cyber harm into several subproblems based on the definition. Use a generative AI like ChatGPT to detect these subproblems and solve these subproblems separately by writing prompts to solve these subproblems, put the results of these subproblems back together to solve the main problem, and finally, based on a few samples of cyber harm that you could possibly find online, test and refine your decision framework on these samples. And when you test your decision framework on these samples, you will see how well it works in detecting cyber harm. I would urge everyone here today to go home and try this framework for yourself. Thank you.